For our next session, titled Ensuring America's Launch Infrastructure Advantage, please welcome Col Brian Chatman, Commander of Space Launch Delta 45, and Col James T. Horne III, Commander of Space Launch Delta 30, for a fireside chat with Major Megan Hainline, Air Force Liaison at SCSP.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining us and for staying through this afternoon. In this next session, we're going to jump into the mission sets of the Space Launch Deltas. The Space Launch Deltas, there's two of them, are the bedrock for America's space launch infrastructure. And they really ensure the strategic capability that is our access to space. So today I've got Col Brian Chatman joining me on stage. We're hoping that Col Horne will be able to dial in here shortly as well. Col Chatman is the commander of Space Launch Delta 45 out of Patrick Space Force Base and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station down in Florida. He's also the director of the Eastern Ranges. Col Horne, when he dials in, is the commander of the Space Launch Delta 30 out of Vandenberg Space Force Base in California, and also is the director of the Western Launch and Test Ranges. So, Col Chatman, your Space Launch Delta was just officially created in May of 2021. Obviously, you have a much longer history prior to that as the Space Force is getting set up. Can you talk us through what your mission is and what your vision is for your command for people that might not be as familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the question. So Space Launch Delta 45 stood up in May of 21 on the backside of the 45th Space Wing when we stood up the United States Space Force. Awesome opportunity to pull launch in and get after critical launch capability. Our mission is to be the world's premier gateway to space, to assure launch capability for the nation and for the warfighter. That basically sums it up.
Fantastic. So this year, the United States is on track to set a world record again for the third year in a row for the most annual space launches of any nation. And I'll just give some context for that. The previous record was held by the Soviet Union from 1982 until 2023 when we broke it for the first time. Last year, the number of launches between the two space deltas was 144. I won't try to estimate this year's, but I know Col Horne just had a successful launch last night with the Falcon 9. With that increasing tempo, which we can only expect is going to continue to grow in the next several years, how are you modernizing your facilities to handle that? And what are your kind of priorities as you're looking to the future for modernization and this new world that we're in with high launch tempo?
Yeah, I'll tell you. We stand on the shoulders of giants, which is amazing. When you look at a decade ago, launch capability off the Eastern Range, we were talking maybe 10, 15, 20 launches in a calendar year. Just before Thanksgiving, we launched 100 times. We have our 103rd launch coming up, and that's just the Eastern Range. Mm-hmm. When you look at the amount of launches that China did last year, they had 66 total launches, space launches, across the entire country. We launched 100 times off the Eastern Range here just before Thanksgiving. The amount of launch cadence between the Eastern and Western ranges, and the amount of capability we are getting up on orbit is at a rate we have never seen across the world, right? With that comes infrastructure upgrades that are much needed. We, 8 years ago, had the road to 24 and then the drive to 48 on the Eastern Range. That was trying and laying the stage to get to 48 launches in a calendar year. That set the pace for space. That set the stage for infrastructure upgrades we need, for additional logistical flows that we need to be able to support a launch cadence. When we look at the 2035 timeframe, we're estimating upwards of 300 launches per calendar year off the East Coast alone, off the Eastern Range. So with that, the OMB was awesome in giving us a huge plus up in funding to take a look at where we have facilities today and move them away from the launch complexes, moving them to what we call the industrial zone. What that allows then is for hazardous operations associated with launch to occur without displacing day-to-day work operations with personnel, because public safety is our number one focus across the board. We're taking a holistic look at where we have launch service providers bed down at, and where what the logistical throughput is needed for from a commodities perspective, from a booster transport perspective, and laying the framework now to be able to support that increased manifest and increased launch capability that we see coming on the eastern range. Colonel Horne's doing the same thing on the West Coast, and I see he's popped up online here.
Colonel Horne, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. We were just talking about the massive increase in launch cadence that we've seen in the last couple of years and what the space launch deltas are doing to modernize and to accommodate that increased tempo. I'll throw that question to you as well with a slightly different lens. A lot of launch infrastructure might be decades old, and we're only getting higher tempo, more complex launches. Through the lens of artificial intelligence and machine learning, how are you modernizing your launch infrastructure, your operations, whether it's from digital security or just improving the tempo that you're able to make launches happen? How are you approaching that from Space Launch Delta 30?
Yeah, thanks. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for having us. First of all, I appreciate it. Last year, we stood up our version of an innovation center called the Crucible. Col James T has the Forge out there. Those are purpose-built innovation centers to leverage the innovation that's coming to the forefront with AI and ML. One of the things we're really excited about, we took our entire process to launch a rocket, and it actually filled on paper an entire conference room table. We then digitized that into a digital model, and we're leveraging AI and ML to tell us where are our pain points, our pressure points, where's our biggest bang for buck in this entire process to then go after and get more efficient or invest money like Col James is saying in the infrastructure to fix a particular bottleneck or things like that. We're super excited about that capability. It's allowing us to make much better and more intelligent and informed decisions than we could in the past. So that's one prime example.
Fantastic. And I can only imagine you're also leveraging some of the commercial advances in AI in a lot of the companies and startups that we're seeing that are able to provide some of those services as well. I want to move into the rapid changes we've seen in launch service provider capabilities in the last decade or so. So obviously we've had SpaceX, Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, ULA's Vulcan, the New Glenn from Blue Origin. Then there's other companies like Firefly, Relativity Space, Stoke Space. How are you balancing bringing on a lot of these brand new capabilities and these emerging companies with also maintaining launch reliability and launch cadence and the current ops tempo while that's happening? And Col James, I'll have you start out this one, but I do want to get Colonel Horne's thoughts too.
Yeah, absolutely. So reliability and cadence, appreciate that. From a national security space launch perspective, we certify each of the launch service providers before ever entering into a contract with them to launch our most secure, most precious satellites that we need to get up and on orbit. That certification process is run through on the acquisition side, from the launch complex itself to the booster, how the booster performance happens, and several other key indicators that we evaluate within the acquisition construct to prove out that reliability before putting on NSSL or National Security Space Launch satellites aboard. From a manifestation and a bed down that said, when we look at the eastern and western range, if you look at the east coast of the United States and the west coast of the United States, you look at the geographical landscape, there's little bumps that bump out. That affords us the opportunity to launch experimental capability and to launch or to bring in new launch service providers to be able to launch and not have to launch over land. Mm-hmm. Public safety, again, being the key, being able to launch over the water allows us from the MRTFB or the Missile Range Test Facility base perspective to test new weapons that we need to test out from a hypersonics perspective or new follow-on advanced weaponry type capability. Also the space launch capability, bedding down new launch service providers, allowing them to work through the initial launches that could potentially result in a bad day or hopefully have success getting capability up on orbit. With the geographical locations of the east and west coast, it offers prime real estate to be able to afford those launch opportunities, prove out those boosters, increase the competitive market space of launch capabilities and industry partners being able to get capability up on orbit.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine that's paired with the modernization efforts you've got going on at your facility as well, expanding the space available for different companies. Can you talk any more to that of how you're ensuring that there is enough space or what kind of partnerships you're doing with industry to expand the space that you do have that you can provide to them?
Yeah, I'm challenged at Cape Canaveral in that I'm just out of real estate from a landscape perspective. Based on the current blast damage assessment areas, flight caution areas, flight hazard areas, the safety rings that we have around the newest launch vehicles that are coming in. LOX methane is the combination of fuel that is the newest combination of fuel we are seeing both in the launch industry as well as in the commercial cruise line industry. That LOX methane analysis today is, from an explosive safety perspective, unknown. So we treat that with the maximum keep out distance, 100% TNT equivalency from a blast radius perspective, from a keep out distance, from a public safety perspective, from a launch service provider to launch service provider safety perspective, right? Mm-hmm. So when we have a operation with New Glenn, for example, we had their second launch off the East Coast here a couple of weeks back. We had the safety analysis came back, and we put everybody at Cape Canaveral in a telework posture because the explosive arcs had the potential to, based on the wind patterns and environmentals that were happening at that time, to cause a potential caution area over the entire Cape. So we put everybody in a telework posture to facilitate that launch operation that day. We are working with the Air Force Safety Program and the Space Systems Command safety programs, and then the Eastern and Western Range safety programs and teams to further analyze that LOX methane combination and reduce the blast radius to tighten in what the keep out zones need to be to facilitate more operations, more space, more concurrent operations, but doing that all through public safety as our number one lens.
Yeah, sounds like a great project for an AI system to model it.
There's a ton of data there, absolutely.
Yeah. And Colonel Horne, I'll kick that over to you if he's still on. One of your focus areas was the operational surge and its impact on current capabilities. And did we lose Colonel Horne? All right.
Absolutely.
Oh, there we go. Here we go. Sorry, this is our screen. Can you expand on that? And how are you maintaining current ops tempo, meeting new ops tempo requirements while also bringing in new providers?
Yeah, sure. First I'll characterize the capacity demand that we're seeing. Similar to the East Coast, we've seen an over 1,300% increase in our launch rate from 2020 till now. Last year, we broke a 60-year record with 51 launches. The last time we had launched that many times was in the 60s. This year, we broke that same record again in October, and we're trending towards 70 launches this year or more. I think we'll hit over 100 in the next 2 years. So there's a tremendous demand and a lot of deconfliction that goes on to make sure that different launch activities and test activities that we support here aren't stepping on each other. A big part of that is things like critical days. So when we're doing maintenance or sustainment on the spaceport and the ranges, we have to stand down ops activity just to make sure that we can maintain those systems until the next launch operation. So part of the $861 million that we're investing here in infrastructure upgrades is to reduce those critical days, to build redundant and parallel systems so that we can work on a portion of the range while we're launching on the other portion to eliminate critical days. So that's a prime example. We're essentially, as Chat mentioned, we're retiring decades of tech debt that we've accumulated in infrastructure investment. We're essentially overhauling a 1960s era infrastructure to catch up and then surpass and leverage state-of-the-art things that we're trying to do today. Now, our vision here is a vibrant, automated, integrated system that leverages all the technology we have today for simultaneous operations across all the domains that we operate in, whether it be air or space, for the mission sets that we have here at Vandenberg. So that's where we're headed.
Fantastic. So talking about the brand new infrastructure and how we've kind of let that sit for a while, obviously we've also got a lot of brand new technology like reusable launch systems or components that weren't a thing 15, 20 years ago. China's also made this a national priority. They've got multiple versions of their Long March rockets where they're trying to get reusable components that are in development. How does U.S. maintain our edge in the reusability and the efficiency side and keep pace or continue to outpace China with these new reusable components? And how does that tie into what infrastructure considerations you guys have had to support that?
Jim, you want to start out there?
Yeah, sure. For us here, I think it's continuing to open the capacity that we have to enable the companies to leverage those technologies. They need increased facilities to do the processing, normally, we had facilities to process a bespoke rocket that launched from the pad. It was expended in the ocean. We moved on to the next one. Now you need capacity in terms of facilities to refurbish all of those reused rockets to then get out to the pad and launch again. That also drives an increase in transportation of those reused rockets back to the port and then onto the spaceport to launch again. So here at Vandenberg, we're doing massive investment in overhauls to our wharf to make it more accessible, to enable simultaneous operations, to increase the number of up days that we have in the harbor. Right now we're hovering around 50% usable days in a year at our harbor, just based on the seawalls and some of the logistics behind it. We're trying to get that up to the 80 to 90% range, and then dual operations, because every single one of our providers here ships their rockets by a boat. So that's a big area that we have to look into. Reusability and the throughput that enables also drives a huge strain on commodities and our transportation infrastructure, whether that's roads, bridges, or other things. So what we have to do here, and I'm sure it's similar to Patrick, is upgrade our infrastructure to be able to handle that throughput and enable them to leverage that technology to the full extent, decrease the number of days it takes to go to the next operation, and just get more efficient overall with how we operate.
From a competitive edge perspective, it's close partnerships with each of the launch service providers. SpaceX, Blue Origin, United Launch Alliance, Relativity, they have extremely smart engineers getting after the launch problem and cadence, and are really pushing the balance on how to get more mass to orbit and how to bring down cost across the board. So it's that close partnership and collaboration with each of them that allows us, one, to maintain that collaborative, that competitive edge over adversaries, to get mass up to orbit, additional satellite capability up to orbit, but then also working with them from the logistics point that Colonel Horne was kind of talking about. So on 16 December, in partnership with Kennedy Space Center, the Eastern Range is hosting our Reverse Industry Day. All of the infrastructure upgrades and plans that we have today were focused on what we knew for launch service provider requirements 2 years ago. That said, now we've changed the face of launch. Starship is coming to the Eastern Range. Blue Origin is talking about a larger launch capability and is working recovery of their vessels at sea today. As each of those launch service providers recover a reusable first stage booster and bring it back via barge into the wharf, I have one line of transport on and off Cape Canaveral. That line of transport is how everybody gets to work every day, and it's also how the boosters get back to where they need to get to for the launch service provider to refurbish that booster, get a new satellite, stick it on top, and get more capability up on orbit. 10 years ago, that wasn't a problem. 2 years from now, that's a big problem. So how do we set up a booster transport lane? Commodity is another big issue that Colonel Horne talked about. I have hundreds of trucks a day today coming through my vehicle inspection station, trucking in the commodities, the liquid oxygen, the liquid nitrogen, the methane, all over to the launch service providers that need that to have the capability, the commodities to get launch operations to occur. As they increase their launch tempo, that drives, based on today's parameters, an increase in vehicular traffic, driving on all the roads, going through the vehicle inspection stations, an increase to my defenders that do vehicle inspections on each of those trucks before they come on my installation. And so how do we look at this problem holistically? Do we upgrade with pipelines to move commodities around the Cape Canaveral? Do we, what are other ways to take a look at how we're getting after the problem for what the launch landscape looks like today, but also where the launch service providers want to get to for tomorrow? Because 2035 is right around the corner, and 300 launches is a whole lot of capability off the Eastern Range.
It definitely is. Where do you think we are at with in conversation with things like the booster transport lane and allowing industry and the private capital that they have, that they can leverage to keep increasing their capacity? Are they able to utilize that to help support some of these, or open up some of these bottlenecks that you're seeing in just a base infrastructure perspective? Are you happy with where those conversations are? Do you think we could be doing more to leverage everything they're bringing to the table that could remove some of these roadblocks?
We are in a new paradigm for launch, right? Again, launching at a cadence the world has never seen. Huge companies coming into the launch game that aren't government backed necessarily, that have a commercial business case that they're launching off of. Congress has been awesome in working through special authorities for us to help recoup some of those costs, and we're actively engaged with Congress and with the launch service providers on how we can facilitate the launch service providers being able to leverage their funds to get after additional upgrades that are outside the fence line of the launch complexes that they have. Today we enter into a lease or license with the launch service providers for a launch complex, and then they do the development within that launch complex to be able to support. But those roads that all of the trucks are driving on for commodities perspective, or wider lanes that are necessary for larger boosters that are going to be recovered and need to be transported back, or new processing facilities that need to be built out, we're in close partnerships with each of the LSPs, and then keeping Congress up to speed on what we are doing, both on the East and West Coast, to be able to support and get after that very challenge. It's not a problem.
Sure. I'd like to pivot a little and talk about threats. So our launch infrastructure, strategic asset, also in one location and potentially a little fragile. So what are you most looking forward to in terms of investment or in future modernization to counter any potential threats in both the physical and the digital realm to maybe answer some of those threats, especially as we're seeing new tactics coming out of Ukraine and Russia, the fear of a drone attack at any time, any place. What are some of the things you guys are looking at to modernize and counter that?
It is definitely a new day when we look at the threat picture and what that means to the Eastern and Western Range. Counter UAS systems are a thing based on what we saw play out in the Ukraine and Russia conflict, right? And we are working with the intel community, specifically with the NRO, and the Eastern Range to install a multi-million-dollar counter UAS system that will help us detect when UASs are flying into the airspace beyond the capabilities that we have today, which are pretty good, right? This is going to take it to the next level and then allow us to negate those capabilities from coming into the airspace that we've closed off where our launch complexes are. From a cyber perspective, we, in September this year, brought the 645th Cyber Defense Squadron into SLD-45. Their job is to protect and defend the cyber terrain associated with the launch networks. They are doing active monitoring and scanning for any adversarial penetration of the cyber networks, and then have capabilities to negate that from occurring and continue to maintain cyber hardening and cyber resiliency across the cyber domain. A huge game changer out on the Eastern Range. Jim, how about on the West Coast?
Yeah, it's similar here. We have a program we call Defend the Mission. Counter SUAS is a key capability that we really are behind on and lacking. Vandenberg, unfortunately, is one of the most attempted infiltrated bases in the DoD. We have hundreds of incursions from foreign adversaries at our gate. We have 42 miles of coastline, 118,000 acres, most of it unfenced, and we're woefully behind when it comes to things like counter SUAS capability. So those are things that we're focused on building that capability. We likewise will stand up the 630th Cyber Defense Squadron here at Vandenberg and defend our mission networks. They'll leverage systems like Manticore, Kraken, and the like to defend our mission networks. So this really is, I think, an emerging area, like Col James was saying. It's kind of our soft underbelly, and so that. And I'll go back to the infrastructure investment we're making. A lot of those investments in our infrastructure is to build resiliency and redundancy as well. Things like protection of SCADA systems and things like that to make sure that we're not vulnerable to those attacks, because we know that our adversaries are watching and they're trying to infiltrate and exploit what they can as they build their own capability, and we have to defend against it.
Mm-hmm. Beyond the immediate risk to the launch infrastructure itself, China has been really working on expanding their launch capability, their volume they can get into space. We still have, obviously, a big launch volume advantage, but they have a lot of state-sponsored programs that are working to scale their space sector. Does this have a risk involved for the United States in our operational tempo? Where do those risks lie? And then what can we be doing to counter or negate some of those risks we might see as they're trying to achieve parity and we're staying out ahead?
Jim, you want to start?
Yeah, it goes back to capacity again. We have to unleash the capacity that we have here to continuously field cutting-edge capability. General Gutlein used to say, buy what we can, only build what we must. And so we don't even have the right lexicon, I think, anymore in launch. It's not good enough to just call a launch a commercial launch or that's a national security launch. Really, they all benefit national security. Starlink, I know for both of us and for many mission partners across the DoD, is something we leverage every day. We'll start leveraging Kuiper once they get up and operational as well. And so anything we can put into orbit helps us stay ahead of the adversary. So leveraging American innovation and truly unleashing the capacity we have at the spaceports is how we maintain that edge.
And that's spaceport specific, of getting mass up on orbit. And absolutely, that is critical, right? As China gets more capability up on orbit, the training pipeline the Space Force has stood up for our officer training corps and for our enlisted pipelines has produced the best Guardians in the world, the best satellite operators in the world. Nobody wants a fight in space, but we're going to ensure that if one does kick off, the Eastern and Western Range are the way we are going to get capability up on orbit, and the Guardians we have in the Space Force today are going to control those satellites to be able to protect and defend America's interests in from and to space.
And to dig into that talent pipeline beyond just the Space Force, you both emphasized that the Space Launch Deltas are more about people than they are even about the rockets. How are you cultivating the next generation of talent to help run the launch infrastructure? So your range operators, your engineers, your data analysts, especially as you're working to integrate AI and we're seeing rapid changes in what the workforce needs to be doing to keep up with pace of technology. How are you thinking about where you're going to get the next generation of talent? Sure, we'll start with you.
I'll tell you, Patrick Space Force Base, we recently stood up STARCOM headquarters, our Space Training and Readiness Command. And they are tasked with developing the next generation of Guardians that feed into the pipelines that are coming not just to the Eastern and Western Range, but to each of the Space Force locations around the world. Right? On the officer side, we recently stood up the Officer Training Course, or OTC. The vision that we have for the officers coming into the Space Force is that every Guardian is a Guardian first. That OTC pipeline, you'll go through space operations, you'll go through intel, you'll go through cyber operations, and then coming out of that, you'll move into an operations tour. Completing that operations tour, you'll have the opportunity to go into the acquisition arena, intel, cyber arena, and deep dive more into a specialty area. But that operations tour, whether it's flying satellites or launching satellites, we have Guardians coming out of the OTC pipeline, both now into the 30th and the 45th, into our range operations squadrons and our space launch squadrons, taking a look at the launch capability because it's critical to national security.
And Colonel Horne, do you have anything else to add on the talent pipeline, especially with the lens of local talent that you need there, maybe longer term than Space Force specific personnel that can help run your range operations? So the civilian, the contracting support, obviously you've got a lot of the commercial companies that bring in their own set of talent, but the more long-term sustainment side of it, where do you see that going? Where are the challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, it's a huge growth opportunity. Space Force was born a digital service. We send as many of our Guardians as we can to what we call supercoders. That's where they go into a month-long extensive immersion in coding. They come out actual coders. They can build apps. We're building a cloud architecture that they can ride those apps on, and so that we can rapidly advance and innovate as the needs of the spaceport emerge and change. We have a shortage of cybersecurity analysts for our cyber defenders. That's a growth opportunity that we're looking at working on. But it's really instilling digital innovation in every single one of our units. We have Sherpas in every single one of our squadrons. They are the link between the Crucible, which is our innovation center, and our units. So we're trying to bake innovation into the DNA of the facility, and then through digital upskilling and things like that the Crucible sponsors, teaching our folks the skills they need to automate processes, get rid of things where a human in the loop is no longer required. We can leverage AI and ML to get more efficient and automate things so that we can focus our people on the true tasks that only humans can do. And so it's a holistic effort, but it starts with education and equipping our folks with opportunities to get after the challenging problem sets in their units.
Sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned holistic too, and I talked about our active duty corps, but our civilian construct, our civilian forces that are there for the long term, we're investing hard in them. We're investing hard in training opportunities and affording those training opportunities. We're extremely busy on the two ranges. Again, that launch cadence that the world has never seen. But taking pause and taking personnel and affording them the opportunity to go get advanced training in areas applicable to the skill sets that they use and bring to the game day to day. One, continues that passion they have that they originally signed up for, and two, helps posture them better to be able to support the launch deltas holistically. So there's a hard focus on training investment for our civilian corps as well as our officer and enlisted pipelines.
Civilian versus convincing people to join the service. I'm curious, a lot of excitement in the space world right now on the civilian side, and I imagine that makes it tough to attract and keep talent on the Space Force side. And I realize this may be not your specific forte for recruiting and sustainment, but what would you say to someone who wants to get into the space world, and what would your pitch be for, hey, here's what the Space Force is doing that no one else is. Here's why what we're doing is unique, and why you find it really fulfilling to be in the Space Force rather than working for SpaceX or one of these other companies.
Yeah, I'll tell you, on the active duty side, that one's an easy one. I came in on an ROTC scholarship because I ran out of money for college. It's supposed to be 4 years and out, and I've had opportunities that my civilian counterparts have never even dreamed of. I had never left the United States prior to joining the military. I've now operated in 32 different countries around the world, right? Those opportunities, those new unique challenges that change every 2, 3, or 4 years when we PCS you to a new assignment are what keep me in and keep me excited and seeing the holistic effort of the Space Force getting after all aspects of the space domain. Mm-hmm. For our civilian corps, that is absolutely a challenge, right? Industry pays a lot more than what the government can pay, but the government, with the government jobs, brings a passion to get after the launch capability. We, right before Thanksgiving, had our 100th launch and threw a big launch celebration, a launch party, to say thank you to our government civilians, military officers, and enlisted. And the civilians were in full front out there at that launch party, having fun with us. They are critical to everything we do across the board. And thank you over to them for what they do day to day, coming in and getting after.
Awesome, and apologies for turning this into a recruiting pitch for DoD. Didn't intend to take it there. So, operational challenges I want to get into. So from your seats at the Eastern and Western Range, what is the hardest part of maintaining your launch tempo, whether that is weather, range safety you spoke about earlier, environmental regulations? What is the driving, persistent challenge that kind of defines your operational tempo and the things that you can constantly run into? We'll start with you, Colonel Horne.
Yeah, I think for us, it's that soft underbelly piece. Protecting the mission is our biggest challenge going forward, both physical infrastructure as well as cyber. I mentioned we're the largest Space Force, 118,000 acres. You can fit every single other Space Force base inside our property and still have land left over. That's the scale and size of Vandenberg. So it's a huge challenge to protect all that real estate. And then cyber is the other piece. As we start to bring online these more modern capabilities, cyber architectures and things like that, zero trust and the rest of it, defending that terrain is going to be critical going forward. So for us, those are two of the biggest challenges, to include counters to Suez, as I mentioned earlier. So that's a big piece of it. We also have an environmental steward responsibility here. We have at both ranges incredible professionals in our civil engineering squadrons that balance the need to continue to increase our capacity with being good stewards of the environment in which we operate. As Col James mentioned, we launch over the ocean. Both bases are located in very environmentally sensitive areas here at Vandenberg, also culturally sensitive. The Chumash Native Americans have a heritage site here and over the water. So balancing the operational needs with being good stewards of our cultural and environmental resources is a critical challenge that we take on every day to do the best we can in both realms while ensuring that we maintain national security. So those are some of our biggest ones here.
You can't talk launch at Cape Canaveral without talking weather, right? We have hurricane season that comes through every year. Luckily this year we were blessed with not having any storms come through, but that poses challenges. And then not only are we leading in space launch, but we're number 2 in the world for lightning strikes. Lightning commit criteria make it a challenge to get capability up on orbit. From a public safety perspective, we migrated to the automated flight safety system. Days of old when we would launch, whether it was a space launch capability or a new munitions test that we were launching over the ocean, we had a manual command destruct system. And we said, hey, you're within the left and right boundaries for a launch to be able to occur. And if you go outside of those left or right boundaries or something squirrely starts to happen with that launch, we will send commands up to that booster and blow it up, all through the lens of public safety. When we went to the AFSS, the Automated Flight Safety System, that really increased the cadence, the opportunity for more efficiency. And we were able to program the left and right boundaries within the rocket and use the AFSS system to manage and maintain the rocket within that silo that it needs to stay in as it's going into its orbital trajectory. With that, we defined lightning commit criteria that said, hey, if there's lightning in the area at certain levels, we're not going to risk a launch that could occur, because we run the challenge or the opportunity for lightning to hit the booster and then negate that AFSS system from doing the destruction that it would need to do if something anomaly happened with that launch capacity capability. The other challenge that we have, in my opinion, is that we haven't holistically embraced AI. When we look at the safety analysis that comes in and the amount of data that we analyze for every launch or a new launch vehicle that is going through that certification process, we have reams and reams and reams of data that a human is analyzing and going through to make a smart safety decision with regards to what the hazard areas are going to be and what the certification parameters are going to be to certify that launch vehicle. That seems ripe for AI to come in and help with the predictive analytics associated with today's known hazards, and then where we can go for the future reduction in hazard areas, and then have a human look at the end results and say, yeah, that makes sense. We haven't fully embraced predictive analytics on our range assets, right? As far as uptime and downtime, we started to venture into that, but there's still a lot of work that we can get into in the AI realm, and I'm looking forward to bringing that onto the East Coast through the Forge and through my teams that are smart in the data science realm.
I'm sure there's a few in the crowd with AI startups that would love to hand you a card that can solve that problem for you. Since we've got a little extra time here, I want to get back into the capacity conversation and really looking at how do you balance this for the payloads themselves. A lot of commercial interest, a lot of, Starlink is huge. It's only increasing in volume, the commercial interest in getting something on orbit. How do you balance that and ensure capacity for national security assets or DoD or civil assets? What are some of the mechanisms you have in place to balance that? What if you need to surge on the national security front? How are you guys approaching that? And I know you mentioned earlier, you see even the commercial entities also being national security assets as well. So even though it's Starlink and commercial, that's something that the DoD could use or DoW could use for communications. But I'll pause there and let you guys take it away. Colonel Chapman, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, we have an annual forum called the CLSRB, the Common Schedule Launch Review Board, that takes a look at all of the national security satellites that are in the pipeline, when they are expected to be complete from a production perspective, when we will get through processing, and when we need to manifest those onto a booster. And then the acquisition team takes a look at what that pipeline is and then goes and acquires a launch service to get that capability up on orbit. That then feeds into my range operations squadron and my dynamic range scheduling team that schedules out that launch capability. Around that is when we then go in and schedule in other launch service providers or launch requests that come up based on what industry has that they want to get up and on orbit, or academia or civil needs. We've got great partnerships with the launch service providers at the Eastern and Western Range. There's weekly dialogues that we have on the East Coast with each of the LSPs, and we bring them into one ops-related meeting, where we talk about what the manifest is for the next week, next 2 weeks, and next month, and then identify if there's any changes that we need to make with regards to new launches that need to on-ramp because new commercial capability or industry capability is ready to go get up on orbit. So my range scheduling shop works all that real time for us, and it's those close partnerships, again, with those launch service providers that really facilitate the ability to mitigate any challenges or conflicts we have in range scheduling.
And Colonel Horne, did you have anything additional to add?
No, I think he covered it well. I go back to what we were talking about earlier. It really is not accurate anymore to say that's a commercial launch, that's a national security launch. We're leveraging the breadth and width of the capability that we put on orbit, whether it's something we buy ourselves or our service we buy on orbit. I think in the future we can get better at combining payloads. There's some issues with indemnification and liability on, who's responsible for mission assurance for that rocket and things like that. But we can start mixing and matching payloads. You're starting to see that a lot with a lot of the transporter missions and things like that, where we're leveraging a commercial service, but it's got critical national security payloads on it. So I think we're doing a good job balancing all of the different modes of transportation in terms of rocketry and licensing to get on orbit. And really, it's just about increasing our capacity and doing it more often. I think some of the ways we can protect against that is we're trying to get to the point where we can launch simultaneously, multiple times a day. Right now, I think the closest we can get it down to here is about 16 hours. I think Col Chapman's in a sort of place there working with some of his providers. We want to get that down to seconds, or even being able to launch multiple times at the same time. So just continuing to increase that capacity, I think, gives us what we need in terms of flexibility to get on orbit.
When it comes to schedule conflicts, at the end of the day, Colonel Horne owns the West Coast schedule and I own the East Coast schedule, and national security will always take precedence. We will ensure that the highest requirement satellites get up on orbit when they are needed to be up on orbit.
I'm not sure if you guys are able to get more into this, but Tactically Responsive Space, or TAC-RS, is a program I've seen a little about in the Victus Hayes mission. Are you able to expand on what that is and some of the successes or pauses that you've seen over the last couple of years where that effort is at?
Yeah, Colonel Horne's lived that real time out on the West Coast. Jim, over to you.
Yeah, so I can't get into a lot of details about Victus Hayes, but certainly it's a capability that we're working on the ConOps. We're engaged with U.S. Space Command on operational plans and launch annexes to those plans so we can start to build the mechanisms and the pieces we need to turn on that capability on need. I think we now have the infrastructure and the launch architecture we need to get there. The real question is the satellite going to be ready? And do we have the processing capabilities here to get it ready to integrate with the rocket and go? Now the cost of launch and the cost of space capability is decreasing. That starts to give you flexibility. You can build residual capability. You can have it on the shelf waiting for need. And that's really, I think, where we need to get to. And then that creates the flexibility we need to execute the operation. So we're testing out all those ConOps and tactics, techniques, and procedures, and we're preparing to be able to launch at will based on national need.
And if you could expand on, for people that aren't as familiar with what TAC-RS is, it's my understanding it's a from go to something on orbit and capable in 24 hours or 27 hours. You guys have done a couple of demonstrations. Can you explain any more about what is difficult about that, or what that program is meant to address, what capability it's meant to give?
Yeah, traditionally we would buy a launch service 2 years in advance. We would be preparing the rocket through the production facility for launch. The spacecraft simultaneously would be going through its systems checkouts, vacuum tests, and things like that, get ready for orbit. And those two parallel processes would meet at the end of approximately a 2-year cycle for launch. The only way to get around that, we know how to do this, right? We have a nuclear deterrent capability that's ready to launch in minutes all over the nation. You have to build the infrastructure. You have to have the facilities ready, and you have to have the capacity on demand to pull off the shelf and go. And that's really where we have to get to. And to reduce that from 24 hours down to hours to even minutes, you have to have everything in place and ready to go. And that's the infrastructure we have to build to get there.
Mm-hmm. So really addressing the surge, the desire to be able to surge a space capability, which is looking forward to. We'll go into the final question for both of you. What gives you the greatest confidence, this is very broad, but the greatest confidence in America's ability to sustain our launch advantage over our competitors with all the new technologies, whether it's the government industry partnerships we have that are unique? What is it about America that is enabling and going to continue to enable us to stay ahead in our launch capacity?
It's people, right? It's the teams that we have coming together. It's the partnerships, the collaboration we have with industry. It's the common bonds that we forge getting after what used to be a government-focused mission set of getting capability up and on orbit, right? The innovation that we see across industry and those partnerships we have with the government teams, the collaboration that plays out in our weekly ops synchronization meetings, the tight-knit community across all of the launch service providers at the launch deltas that play out on the eastern and western range. That's it. It's the people.
Fantastic. And Colonel Horne?
Yeah, I'll double down on that and add innovation. I think we ask our people to do incredible things every day. They'll come back and say, sir, that's going to take 6 months, or sir, that's going to take 2 years. and we tell them to do it in 6 days or 2 months. And after they shake the shock look off their face, they go back to their office, they figure it out. And they turn around and they do it much faster than we ever dreamed possible. They're challenging assumptions every day. We don't have the luxury that we had in the past to take the time we did it. And as we start to learn how that frees us and opens us up to do things differently, it's unlocking incredible innovation and creativity. And that's really the strength of our country, our capitalistic economy, and the ability to leverage that innovation and creativity to put critical capability in orbit. And I think it's why we'll win.
Absolutely, on American ingenuity. Colonel Chatman, Colonel Horne, please join me in thanking both of these gentlemen for taking the time to be here with us today. They have very busy schedules, and they really, really appreciate
Appreciate
it.
it very much.
Thank you.
For our final session,